Remember in the SNES and Genesis days, when every game had a mascot? Those years are often referred to as the golden age of 2D platformers, and when you look at how many platformers were developed and the success of a lot of them, it's no wonder everyone wanted a piece of the pie. Most prominent maybe was the mascot-driven ones, like Mario, Sonic, Mega Man, Bonk, Rystar, Awesome Possum, Rocky Road, and Bubsy? Anyways, the point is, there were a lot of these around, even in the early 90s. But during the fifth generation of consoles, starting with the Nintendo 64 and the revolutionary Super Mario 64 in 1996, 3D platforming set in for full, and the 2D platformer was slowly starting to slip into the back of people's minds. However, just 1 year before Mario set the bar for 3D gaming, another company wanted to take their shot at the mascot-driven platformer, and that company was Ubisoft. Originally founded in 1986 by the five Guillemot brothers, Christian, Claude, Gerard, Michel, and Yves Guillemot, in Carentoire, or however you say that, a small village located in the Morbihan department of France's Brittany region. Ubisoft was at the time more of a video game publisher than a video game developer. That changed in the early 90s, when the company initiated its own in-house game development program, which led to the 1994 opening of a studio in Montreal. And almost 2 years later, they released what would become the first in a long series of games, Rayman. The original concept for the game was that a 10-year-old kid named Jimmy got sucked into a world called Here It's Cool, real original, which he made on his computer. The idea came from Michel Ancel, the creator of Rayman, who actually started drawing the character when Michel himself was a teenager, which I find kinda weird because I don't really get the feeling that this is what a teen would draw, especially with the whole lack of limbs. But there's actually a technical reason for that, and early promo material shows the character with limbs. This was, of course, later dropped since his current look became so iconic. Rayman 1 has been released on so many systems it's hard to keep track of sometimes, but it was originally released on the PlayStation 1 on September the 1st, 1995, but only in North America. This is another one of those games that I, myself, never really owned. Instead, the first time I got a glimpse of this game was when I was visiting one of the neighbors. They would babysit me from time to time, so I grew kinda close with their daughter, which is just a year younger than me, and her older brother, which is 3 years older than her. Well, when I say got close to the brother, I mean in the sense that I didn't really have much of a choice. The girl and I was good friends for most of my childhood, but we eventually just drifted apart, I guess. The brother, who I will call Mr. Inappropriate for reasons you'll discover shortly, operated under the idea that, oh, hey, you're in my house. That means I can mess with you. It was a friendship, if you can call it that I never really wanted, but rather got forced into, I feel. Anyways, he had a lot of games though, which I figured was worth putting up with him proudly announcing that he farted and his talk of boobs and other stuff that I'd barely even spared a thought at that age. Remember, he was 2 years older than me, which is an immeasurable amount of time at that age. Some years later, he even tried to get me, a 13-year-old, if not younger, laid when our families went on Easter vacation together. But I digress. I discovered a lot of games for this guy though. All of them PS1 games, since it was the only console he had. But the noteworthy ones that I remember are Hydro Thunder, Croc, Tekken 3, and of course, Rayman. I never really got to play any of these games, maybe except for Tekken when he needed an opponent. So the extent of my experiences was to watch them in action while he played. I did get to try out Rayman and Croc for a little while though. I would sneak into his room where the console was when he was at school and play the games that way. But this never lasted for very long, and I remember thinking Rayman was really hard, which is why I probably didn't try to pick the game back up until several years later. Before I did though, I'd played both Rayman 2 and Rayman 3, so when I remembered there was a prequel to these two great games, I started looking. At first I looked for the original PS1 game, but that was nowhere to be found, especially since I didn't have much money back then and used games wasn't really a thing yet. I then discovered that you could download it for the PC, and for free at that. Of course, this was a cracked version, and I'm still baffled by how I never got any viruses, even though I spent so much time on LimeWire. This version wasn't quite what I remembered though, so after encountering one of the many steep difficulty curves, I gave up out of frustration and never looked back. But that all changes right now. With the digital offerings of the newer consoles, I can finally rediscover the PlayStation 1 original through the PlayStation 3. And just gotta install it first. Hang on. Oh hey, remember these copyright screens that was always present every time you booted up a PS1 game? Good times. I have to say, this game is stylish right out of the gate. Even the title card knows this and wants to get into the game as fast as possible. Just look at him go! We're greeted with an animated cutscene telling us everything that's transpired before we got here. The evil Mr. Dark has stolen the Great Proton, I'm sorry, I mean Protoon, which causes the once balanced and peaceful world to spiral into disarray. A bunch of freaks and shady characters appear and imprison the now scattered Electoons in cages, and it's Rayman's job to free them. I just love this intro. The voiceover especially brings this feeling of playfulness to an otherwise pretty gloomy sequence, and it fits the game really well. The intro ends with Mr. Dark standing on his plateau, looking onto the world with his binoculars, which, in fact, is how you see Rayman moving about the stage select. This is a really cool touch, I think, which I didn't really get when I was younger. It makes sense that the villain would like to keep track of a hero's progress, and framing it like he's actively looking at you from afar makes the whole thing even more ominous. It's pretty obvious even from the stage select, but once you enter the first level, Pink Plant Woods, you can't help but notice that the art in this game is stunning. The backgrounds are detailed and the foregrounds even more so. The plant life is, well, living. The mushrooms jump up and down and the flowers dance like no one's around. It's worth to mention that this game was originally planned for the Atari ST, with Michel Ancel being the only one working on the project. Later, when Frederick Hughes joined, they started to instead focus on putting the game on the SNES via the newly announced CD-ROM add-on, but it got moved to the Jaguar because the add-on was cancelled. There's actually some images from the SNES prototype floating around on the internet, and it really shows how much progress was made in the visual department with the switch to more powerful hardware. They of course later shifted their focus yet again, and now over to the PlayStation, and the difference in quality between the two versions are both subtle and not so-so. The visuals didn't suffer quite as much, producing only a slightly more washed out image on the Jaguar compared to the PlayStation 1. But the audio, oh man, the audio took a huge hit, which is a shame since the music in this game is so good. VC Decide on YouTube has a really good comparison video on the two versions, so if you're interested, go give it a look-see. Like I said, the music in this game is really good. The first tune that greets you is this happy and bouncy song, and it's the perfect intro to use when you're luring someone into a false sense of security. Because believe me, that's exactly what this game is doing. But more on that later. Instead of doors or portals or whatever, Rayman 1 uses these exclamation mark signs to signal the end of the map and promptly moves on to the next segment. This is done with a unique audio clip and a little dance on Rayman's part when you reach it. Yeah! Cool. In In the following part, you spawn in what can be described as a more gloomy forest. Gone is the open background, cheerful music, and most of the dancing plants. Instead, it's replaced by a thick forest background. More like a jungle and only creepy ambient noise with animal noises and cicadas chirping. After a couple of steps into this new area, you start hearing strange noises from behind. And after a few more steps, you realize the weird dings are actually from when enemies appear. If you didn't already realize that Rayman doesn't have any kind of attacking move, you surely will now. He's almost just like a blank slate. Your only option is to continue on ahead, and as you do, the density of bad guys per platform just keeps on growing. And as we do, the music slowly starts to set in. It's an almost unnerving tune. It makes you feel like you really shouldn't be here, that you're constantly in danger, and you're not wrong to feel that way either. After all, you have no means of protecting yourself. This is such a stark contrast to the first section. If that section was when the world was at peace and in balance, then this is the world after Mr. Dark stole the Great Protoon and plunged it into chaos. Thankfully, you don't have to wait too long to be able to fight that chaos. After finishing the second segment, you meet Batilla the Fairy, the same one that fought Mr. Dark when he stole the Protoon, and she gives you the power to punch. It's time to fight back. Attacking can be weird. All you really need to do to defeat most enemies is hit them. You do that by pressing the square button, but if you don't keep it pressed for a little while before you release it, you only throw a weak punch that doesn't travel that far. Side note, I just now realized that Rayman is literally throwing a punch. If you do keep the button pressed, however, Rayman will charge his attack for a faster and more devastating fist. My preferred method is to jump and then punch, since it automatically gives you a certain charge that can one-hit KO most enemies. But like I said, this can be spotty at times. Sometimes it seems like the game just has it in for you. Take this part for example. I walk towards and pick up this item. An enemy then spawns behind me, but I don't notice since the ding comes at the same time as I pick up the item, and when I finally notice, he's right behind me, so I panic, naturally, and throw a punch, which hits him. But for some reason, he just won't die. He attacks me and I nudge closer to the water's edge, thanks to the knockback. I attack again, and still, the punch won't register as a hit. He attacks me one more time and I fly into the water, which is an instant kill. This is just the first of many times I muttered, "This is fucking bullshit," to myself while playing this game. The worst offender here is probably the hunter. You know, the guy that shoots giant bullets that house an arm and tries to hit you with a mallet? Yeah, for some reason the hitbox on this dude is all over the place. You can't hit him when he has his gun up, but sometimes you can. Even if you hit him from behind, he occasionally won't take any damage. This is by far the most annoying when you're in an auto-scrolling level or on a moving platform. Thankfully it doesn't happen quite as often, but it's still infuriating when it does. On a positive note though, I really love how animated these enemies can be. Every part of the game has its unique enemy design. In the forest, it's these green safari dudes. The tall ones can even be scared by your grimace move. Bandland has enemies designed around music and instruments. Except this dumb green guy. And I swear to God I will end these things one day and obliterate their kind by sending them all to a chilly death in space. In Picture City... Actually, Picture City has some sort of identity disorder. The levels themselves are modeled after art utensils, I guess, with pencils, erasers, and pencil sharpeners acting as platforms, and drawing pins and fountain pens acting like stage hazards. But the level-exclusive enemies are space pirates riding on pants. The other enemies, the hunter and the anti-tunes, those small blue balls with arms, are recurring enemies and you'll find them all over the place. I really like the design on all the enemies. They're about as carefully planned out as Rayman is, which is always a big plus when there's not really that many variations of them. Anyways, so you finally finish the level and you're sent back to the level select, and 2 new paths open up to you. The upper path leads to a save space where, if you're using a memory card, you can save your game. If you don't have a memory card, you can choose to use a password instead, and the save space will show you the password you need to input to get back to where you left off. Next up, the Anguish Lagoon. I'm just gonna make a note here and say that if you're thinking about going back to the first level to get the cages you missed, don't bother. You still need other powers to get them. Speaking of powers, in this level you get the power to hang from ledges. Yeah, when I said Rayman was a blank slate, I meant it. I always thought he looked like a surfer dude too, so how he doesn't have the power to hang already is beyond me. That's what surfers do, right? In this level you also fight a boss, a giant mosquito that comes flying at you at high speeds. All the bosses in this game require you to learn a pattern, then attack when they're open, and this is a pretty nice intro to that. The attacks are well telegraphed, but you still feel like you just barely avoid them, and the moment you need to attack is clear as day. After the fight, you make friends with the mosquito, of course, and enter an auto-scrolling flying section. The area starts out slow, but goes by blazing fast towards the end, where you follow a trail of collectibles, and thank God for that, because this mosquito is so goddamn heavy, you'd have no way of reacting to something appearing before you at that speed. After completing the level, you're met with another fork in the road, only this time one of the roads leads to a completely different setting, Bandland. I'm gonna go north though, since that level is the more interesting of the two, and I like fully completing one area before I go to the next. In the Swamp of Forgetfulness, you help out Tarzan by punching his toga down from a branch, and he rewards you with a seed that you can use to plant trees with. This is one of the oh so few levels in the game where Rayman gets a one-off power-up, which is gone after 1 or 2 segments. These levels are, of course, fully designed around this gimmick, and thus naturally makes good use of them. This level does not pull its punches. One mistake and you fall into the rising waters and die. Oh right, I forgot to talk about the plums. Plums have actually become a staple in the Rayman series for some reason, and that probably started in this game. After the flooding part of the level, you spawn next to a row of tall greenies. Now you could jump down and dispatch them one by one, but what the game actually wants you to figure out is that if you punch the plums hanging from above, they will fall on their heads and get stuck, making a platform for you to jump on. This is so in thread with the silly nature of the game, I love it. Plums can also be used to ride on through water, where they travel the way you're facing, while making some kind of motor sound, and they can be ridden on to avoid spikes or other hazards, all of which you do in the span of this level. So far, the game hasn't been that hard. Sure, it's had some challenging sections, but I still have 7 lives to spare. That all changes after Mosquito's Nest. Counting the 1-up I got in the stage, I lost a total of 6 lives during that level. The difficulty spikes are really all, and not only is this a hard level, but they throw a mean boss fight on you at the end. As long as you're quick to learn his patterns, it's not too bad, but this guy has a huge health bar. You need to hit him 12 times before he goes down. And if you die or didn't pick up a health power up, you'll have to do it all with only 3 HP yourself. So that's something. Lastly, you're rewarded with the power to grab before you're back at the level select screen. There's no other path left, so the only choice we have for now is Bandland. This is where the game starts to get really hard. To me, Bandland is infamous for being the place where I've stopped playing every time I've tried to play this game. Even the first level almost had me stomped. See, just at the start of the level, there's this tiny gap you need to get past to continue with the level. I tried to crawl, but no matter what combinations I made with the D-pad, Rayman just refused. Okay, I thought, maybe there's another way past. Believe it or not, I actually ended up finding a secret route leading to a power-up. But that's beside the point. You can actually see some things just barely off screen when you're slipping down the first slide. See, tings, along with 1-up statues and cages, are the collectibles in this game. They don't really do anything, except you need 10 to access the bonus stages, and if you collect 100, you get an extra life, and the counter resets to 0. But the thing about tings are that they usually lead you to secret paths, or in some cases to where you need to go. So naturally, I thought there was a platform underneath that I could land on. And with some momentum and a well-timed jump, I did. Well, after I died one time, but who's counting, right? Turns out, you're not supposed to go that way at all. Instead, you are supposed to crawl through that one passage. How, you ask? Well, I don't know if me not reading the manual is to blame or the controls are just that unintuitive. But to crawl, you need to press the R1 or L1 shoulder buttons. Found that out after I got stuck down here. This time with literally no other way to go. Well, with that little mishap out of the way, Badland is actually pretty fun. It introduces a lot of ideas that will be repeated later in the game. Most notably, these slippy slopes that when you go full throttle down puts even Sonic's speed to shame, and some of that are exclusive to this world. The most fun one are probably the trumpets. There's this one section in Allegro Presto where you're ascending upwards by being blown from side to side by the trumpets, and you need to time your jumps to land on the very small platforms, or else you'll fall a long way down and have to retry. You know the designers had to almost tie themselves to their chairs to not have a bottomless pit at the bottom here, because oh boy, is there a sharp difficulty spike in Badland. Everything here wants to kill you. This is especially noticeable when you jump down to grab a power-up, and the platforms themselves spawn eyes that starts to shoot lightning bolts at you. Couple that with some unforgiving platforming challenges, the most iconic Rayman power-up, the helicopter here, and some amazing music, and you've got Badland. The boss here is Mr. Sax, and not unlike the last area boss, there's a chase section here too. But this time, it's the boss himself chasing you, and you actually fight him a bit first, so that's new, I guess. It's actually not that hard of a fight. Once you reach the end of the fairly easy chase sequence, he's already pretty low on health, and you fight him just as you did previously by hitting the bouncing notes back at him. Except this time he has these bombs that either explode into a ring of musical notes that travel outwards, or explode in a small line on the ground. Next up is Blue Mountains. This is the first instance where you actually need the grab power-up, so if you didn't feel confident enough to tackle the mosquito's nest before, this is as far as you'll be going. There's a lot you won't be noticing when you're playing the game since you're caught up in all the challenges it's throwing at you. But watching back the footage while writing this, I can't help but notice things I never knew were there. Like the nice backgrounds and the idle animation the golems does when you leave them alone for a while. I was gonna write that I felt this area was a little on the bland side with its repeating rocky scenery, but I see now that the lighting, the backgrounds, and the variety on display here is all a delight to behold. Take into account the level design, and this might be my favorite part of the game. One of the first things that happens here is actually another chase sequence with that world's boss, but relax, you won't be fighting him just yet. Even though they might look daunting, I think these levels are some of the most fun in the game. There's a lot of clever puzzles and super fun platforming segments here that take full advantage of your abilities. It's especially satisfying to just jump flawlessly from one flying ring to the next without using the helicopter power. Except for some sudden, short auto-scrolling segments, there's no sudden difficulty spikes like in the other worlds here either. There's one part that kinda irks me though. At the start of Mr. Stone's Peaks, you get a super helicopter power from a musician as thanks for digging out his guitar from under a rock. This isn't the bad part, though the controls here can be a bit floaty, but I'll get back to that later. No, the part that I, and probably everyone else playing through this game for the first time, maybe even the second, gets stumped on is the segment that comes after this first part. You're thrown into a vertical shaft. Beneath you there's water that will insta-kill you, and above you there's 2 rocks connected to a stone flake via 2 ropes, and it's slowly pushing you down against the water. Sure, the water is draining, but the stone flake is pushing you towards it even faster. This is all background art too, it doesn't have any collision to it except for the big stone block. But the reason it's so annoying is what you're supposed to do is hover over the ropes and let your hair cut them. Simple. The only problem is there's nothing telling you to do this. Not only do you have to interact with the background, something you've never done until now and will never do again, there's also an incredibly limited window of time for you to do it before you die. At first I thought you had to lead those spike projectiles through the ropes to cut them, but that seemed to have a sort of a delayed effect, I thought. I did of course finally figure out the trick to it after a ton of tries, but there's a few problems with this. First off, this segment is designed to kill you, at least twice. If you're playing this for the first time, you need to instantly grasp the situation and the trick to cutting the rocks loose, or else you'll die. You have just about enough time to cut down both of them before you're pushed into the water, and that's only if you start cutting as soon as you're able to. Second, there's enemies that'll fly towards you, disrupting your rhythm and make you have to realign yourself. There is a pattern you can use to avoid them, but there's no way you'll figure that out until at least your 3rd try. Third and last, the way you ascend and descend is working against you. Pressing X moves you upward a set amount. To me, it seems like it's almost snapping Rayman to a grid when you do, instantly halting his downward momentum. So sometimes you'll move a little, and other times you'll move a little bit more, and how fast you're mashing the X button rarely seem to have an effect on how much you ascend. You also gain a lot of momentum when you're simply falling, so keeping yourself aligned with the part of the rope you need to cut while that is also falling but at a different set speed can be a challenge, to put it mildly. Except for that though, the rest of the levels feel well balanced and smooth. Even the boss, Mr. Stone, yeah, clever name, I know, puts up a challenging fight without being unfair, which, to be fair, all the bosses has so far. Enter Picture City. After beating Mr. Stone, you get the power to run, and trust me, you'll need it, because this place is trying its darnest to kill you. It's filled with tight jumps with spikes making said jumps even tighter, a lot of falling, endless pits, downright infuriating cage placements, and moving platforms that you can't grab the edges of. The backgrounds look amazing as usual, but this is the part where the contrast of beautiful art and harsh challenge is at its most saturated. This first level, Eraser Plains, is where I used my first continue, and with special thanks to this extremely unfair boss, my second one as well. Luckily, there is an easy way to cheese this first part of the fight. What you have to do is walk all the way to the right and intercept the guy coming towards you so that the second guy in the lookout of the ship can't hit you with his bombs. Then the bomber will jump down and fight you, and when you defeat him, only then will the real boss show her face. This is actually only the first time out of 2 you'll face her, but both times are infuriatingly unfair. What killed me the first time was the sudden realization that the dagger she plants in the ground suddenly starts jumping around after you damage her. There is literally no way to see this coming, especially not if it's your first time fighting her. All in all, this first level took me about 53 minutes to clear, and that's for a short 3-segment level plus a boss fight. Next up, for the second segment of Pencil Pentathlon, we have another flying stage, only this time there's an approximately 10-fold increase in obstacles and spikes. Well, at least that's how it feels. You no longer have the large open areas to navigate like last time. These are instead replaced by long, narrow passageways, with spikes on the ceilings and bouncy pads on the ground. Only God knows how many times I had to retry this part before I finally got it right, only to realize, well, that I had to do it Again. Because hey, what's better than one long and challenging stretch? Oh, I know! 2 of them in a row! This is also where the problems with the infinite flying come into play. Since you're almost on a grid when flying, like I explained previously, if you don't drop below a certain threshold, when pressing X once, you'll move what feels like 2 increments upward instead of the assumed 1. In these segments, there are platforms beneath you that makes you bounce up into the spikes if you land on them. And you land on them if you drop to 3 increments below the space where you hit the spikes. Meaning, you have to stay between points 2 and 3 to safely get through the path, but since your momentum when falling carries through the increments on the grid, making falling downwards a constant motion as opposed to rising upwards where you move in increments, the timing gets pretty odd, and if you're even a little off, you end up either hitting the bouncy platforms or flying straight up into the spikes. This is what, among other parts of the level, took my last continue. Which leads us to the last part of Picture City, Space Mama's Crater. This is where I had to use the 99 lives code, on the last segment before the Space Mama fight. I tried to stay as careful as possible, and I only used the code when I had absolutely no other choice. Reduced to 0 continues, 0 1-ups, and 1 hit point, I finally bit the proverbial bullet and inputted the code. Let me just say this first. I highly suggest you don't use this code unless you absolutely have to. Having near infinite lives is never a good thing in platformers, and all it does is make you take much bigger risks than you would have normally, and it makes you impatient, which is not a good mindset to be in when playing games, especially not Rayman. So if you haven't at least gotten out of Bandland before you have to use it, I recommend just starting a new save and playing the game again from the beginning. But why do you have to make a new save? Why can't you just go back and grind 1-ups in the earlier levels? There's even bonus levels that you can gain access to by paying the magician from the intro 10 things that gives you a 1-up when you finish them. That must be the perfect way to hoard lives, right? Wrong! Every 1-up that you collect won't ever reappear. Even the ones you get from the bonus games. The only incentive you have to replay the bonus games is to get a better time, and you also get the things you collect, but there's rarely over 15 in total. So that leaves you with a net gain of 5 things every time you succeed. Since you can only collect lives once, collecting 100 blue orbs is the only way to farm 1-ups. To be frank, the 1-up and continue system in this game is fucking stupid. Losing all your lives with no continues left gets you kicked back out to the title screen, which means that if you saved with 0 lives and 0 continues, that's where you'll start off again. If it weren't for the 99 lives code, I, and probably many others, would never have finished this game. Heck, to the hell with finishing the game. Without the code, I wouldn't even have beaten the Space Mama fight. This one is a real piece of work. To begin with, a big washing machine comes flying in from behind, giving you approximately 0.5 milliseconds to respawn with a duck, or else you'll lose a hit point. Imagine this. You've finally gotten to this point. You have 0 continues, 0 lives, and 1 HP left, and you're preparing to summon your most elite gamer skills when you suddenly get run over from behind by a goddamn washing machine and you're booted right back to the title screen. Don't tell me that you wouldn't have taken your disc out of the PlayStation and broken it in two while setting fire to your Sony and Ubisoft memorabilia, because if you do, you're a filthy fucking liar! This is just the first problem of many with the Space Mama fight though. The others range from the measly, weird hitboxes and I can't believe I have to dodge these attacks for 3 minutes before I get to attack her every time I retry the fight, to the infuriating hit the washing machine enough times, even though hitting it sometimes doesn't look like it has any effect on it at all, to make it bounce out of the scene, and since it happens so suddenly, it hitting you on the way out is an inevitability. But whatever. After you defeat that tub of lard, you can finally move on to the final world of the game, the Caves of Scops. These levels are actually really fun with a lot of cleverly hidden secrets. You have to really sharpen your ears and focus on the sound effects for things appearing, and keep on the lookout for things that might indicate a hidden path, because there's a lot of them. In one case, they even play with your expectations and hint to the hidden path by not placing a thing where it is. Other than that, the music is peaceful and the art is gorgeous. What more is there to say? Oh yeah, right. So in the second level, Eat at Joe's, you're sent into some caves to bring power back to Joe's restaurant. But since it's dark in there, Joe gives you a firefly, which you presumably keep in your hand? I am not a fan of these kinds of levels. It's not too bad since it's just for a short time, but while it lasts, it's not fun. I get that Rayman's supposed to be keeping the firefly in his fist, but I could really do without the light bouncing around like that when you walk. Thankfully, it doesn't take long until we find the cause. Looks like someone forgot to shove the plug into the socket, and this wiring has seen better days, but oh well. As we get the electricity flowing again, we catch a ride back with the newly reactivated UFO things. Joe is, as expected, pretty happy about having the power returned to his shack, so he takes out his balls and lets us jump on them to traverse the water. After you've traveled a tiny distance, you'll notice that there aren't any other balls for you to jump on. Coincidentally though, a big-nosed fish spawns behind you and starts shoving the ball you're on forwards. In most cases, you can just run and glide to the next ball, but there are some places where you'll need to have to stand around and wait. But of course, since this is Rayman, that too is going to become pretty infuriating. You see, there's this fish, and he attacks you half a second before you think he'll attack. So most of the time, you'll mistime your jumps and get knocked back into the water. My blood is boiling just by watching back this footage, and it's pretty late at night at the time of me writing this. My notes on this starts at stupid fish, then escalates to no, really, fuck this piece of shit, to a bunch of scribbles to oh my god, and then finally when I actually got through it. Oh, how little I knew of the anger that would await me at Mr. Scott's stalactites. The lead up to the boss isn't bad, in fact it's kind of fun, but oh god does that fun get sucked out of your dead, lifeless body faster than you can say, "What the fuck, game?" I'm gonna be honest with you, I had no idea what was going on here in the first phase. For some reason, the pattern of the platform sinking into the lava changed about 3 times. The first pattern was seen when I first entered the arena, then the second time, and the third stuck through until the end. That didn't stop me from being thoroughly confused already by then though. I caught on pretty early that you had to hang from the ledge when he was stomping towards you, but when I finally did that a couple of times in a row, and still nothing happened, I turned to Google. Turns out that you just have to keep doing that until he decides to move on himself. Why it takes so long? I don't know, it all just seems extremely unnecessary, especially since you have to go through it all over again when you die. Next phase, he shoots down some platforms, the last of whom you have to jump off in the last second to reach safe ground, and then it's the actual fight. This one's a joke. All you have to do this time is be careful to jump over his claw when he shoots it at you, and then be really careful to jump again when it returns. After that, he's gonna try to shoot you with a ball of energy, but the energy for some reason follows your fist, and to damage him you have to throw your fist just at the right moment so that the ball of energy hits him in his face. Do this a couple of times and you're done. Then, finally, the time has come for our showdown with Mr. Dark. But not before we destroy every single cage in the game. Yeah, it's one of those games where you kinda have to get 100% to finish it. In my opinion, clearing a game 100% should always be optional. Like, forcing the player to painstakingly scour every corner of a game for one missed collectible is thankfully something you don't see very often. But it's almost always met with an unwillingness to cooperate, and most likely ends with the player leaving the game unfinished altogether. Thankfully though, since there aren't really that many levels, and I'd already collected most of the cages anyway, going back isn't that much of a bother. It's only a handful of cages that are placed so that you have to go out of your way to find them, and Rayman 1 does a really good job of guiding you to most of them, meaning if you play the game like I did, there's only 5 to 6 levels where you haven't gotten them all, some of which was locked behind not having some of the upgrades. I also discovered that in the stages where the last cage is in the first segment of the level, you can simply go back to the exit sign and you'll have collected the cage, which makes everything even simpler. I collected every cage except 2 after my first rethread through the stages, one of which was pretty tricky to find. To be fair, collecting all the cages in this game isn't that much of a hassle. But, that's a big juicy but, if you hope to get through this game without the 99 lives code, you'd better have sharpened your platforming skills to fucking perfection. Like I said before, some of my deaths was likely because of me getting impatient and reckless because of how many lives I had. But I still managed to die over 20 times in the course of finding all these things. I'm pretty sure that if you tally up all the lives I've lost in the course of playing, they'd far outweigh the amount of actual 1-ups programmed into the game. So then, Mr. Dark's Dare, the final level. You start off by rushing down a frosting-covered hill in a frying pan. Not exactly the scenery you'd imagine seeing when you're in the last level, inhibited by someone called Mr. Dark. The frying pan carries some momentum with it, which you can alter with the use of your punch. It's not at all required though, unless you mistime a jump and get slowed down. It's a simple enough segment, and most importantly, it's really fun. Though the fact that you can drown in the sauce or whatever in this part is slightly annoying. Next up, we have our first meeting with Dark himself. He summons a dark version of Rayman that mirrors all his moves. Think the cosmic clones in Super Mario Galaxy, if you will. And he instantly kills you on contact. You'd think the game would go all out on you since this is the final level and all, but in my opinion, there's little to no unfairness present here, unlike some of the other stages. Actually, it's just pure fun, and when you make a mistake, it always feels like it's your fault, which is the way it's supposed to be. By this point in the game, you should have a good grasp of what Rayman is capable of. And you'll need it too, not just to avoid your dark counterpart, but also to navigate your way to the end. Speaking of navigating, in the penultimate segment, Mr. Dark takes away your ability to walk straight. Well, not exactly. All he does is reverse your walking controls, meaning that to go right, you now have to press left. Not really much of an annoyance, but you have to kind of rewire your brain a little. Also, would you look at that? There's music present? Actually, I think I encountered a bug here. You see, when you start up the game, you can hold down a certain button combination and you'll see a special animation of Rayman doing some stuff. When I first entered the final level, I thought it was supposed to be this way. Well, that was until I reached the first exclamation sign. Yeah, something went terribly wrong here, but I'm glad I got to sample at least a little bit of the music. This whole level is sweets and carnival themed, so of course, as is the music and enemies. You'll encounter clowns of various designs and purposes. This guy even punches the ground and reveals a previously unseen animation of Rayman sitting on the ground looking annoyed. A little while into the second segment, Mr. Dark gives you back your controls. Well, kinda, except this time you're stuck in a continuous run. All you have to do here is focus on jumping and gliding, and it's not really that hard even. Next, Mr. Dark takes away your punching ability, which leaves you unable to defend yourself yet again, just like the beginning of the game. Awaiting you at the end is a boss gauntlet, but the bosses might seem a bit different than you remember. We start off with Mr. Dark himself, taunting Rayman by hanging his fist power up from a rope and elevating it just beyond reach whenever he gets close, and oh come on, I totally got it that time. Then, Mr. Dark begins shooting fireballs at us, which we have to dodge, and just when Rayman is trapped between the two columns of fire, with the last boss proclaiming his doom, two Protoons swoop in and reclaim our fist for us. At this moment, Mr. Dark flees and lets his minions do his dirty work for him. These guys are fusions between the previous bosses we've fought. The stained glass windows in the background indicates which combinations of bosses we're going to face next by lighting up its respective symbionts. There's no random element to this though, thankfully, so the combinations will be the same each time. First, you fight a combination of Mr. Scops and Mr. Stone, then the fusion of Space Mama and, for some reason, the Purple Mosquito, and lastly, the monster that is Mr. Sax and the Purple Mosquito again. But I'm pretty sure there's a hint of Space Mama in there too. As long as you get their patterns down, they should be easily dispatched. Especially the second boss, since that one's incredibly easy to cheese. The only thing that pisses me off about this fight is that unless you know the third boss is coming, you're guaranteed to take damage, since not only are you inclined to stay in the middle during the second boss, but you get minimized before the third appears, and he appears directly above you in the middle. I actually died from this during the first attempt where I got that far. On another note, I'm really glad I got to listen to this track, because it's rockin'! Anyways, after defeating that last guy, you win the game? But where's Mr. Dark? All you get is a short fireworks display and the narrator telling you you've saved the world, but aren't we missing something here? We never really took care of the main bad guy, just his minions. It's such a weird note to end on. During the credits, we even see small snippets of what the cast is up to after the downfall of Mr. Dark, so I guess he just ran away, never to be seen again? Well, it's not quite that simple. I know that in the PC re-release, Mr. Dark is shown flying over the screen with text saying something like, "Mr. Dark will return again," or something. So it seems like there was a sequel in the pipeline, but we all know that never happened the way we thought it would. Well, that's Rayman 1. Should you go back and experience this game? Absolutely. Not only is it the first game of a now incredibly iconic video game character, but it's one of the best and most stunning platformers from the 32-bit/64-bit era. And yes, I did mean platformers in a general term. The art is fantastic, the music shifts from soothing to intense when it needs to fit the mood, and the controls are extremely on point and precise. But, while I'm glad I finally got to play through the game in its entirety, I didn't necessarily enjoy myself the whole way from start to finish. The things that puts a hamper on the experience are the sudden difficulty spikes, the almost unfair challenges, and the limiting life and continue system. Despite some of these downright rage-inducing flaws, there are more fun moments than there are frustrating ones, and Rayman himself looks to be having fun with everything he does, from jumping over water to swinging past endless pits to hovering inches above sharp spikes. Rayman 1 was one of the last of its type of games we'd see in a while, with 3D platformers such as Super Mario 64 emerging just about a year later, and then, with its success, proceeding to be the genre everyone pursued. Rayman 1 was a fitting swan song for the then diminishing pixel art based subgenre of the 2D platformer. Thankfully, through the indie scene, that subgenre has been revitalized these recent years, and I'm certain when I say that I'm happy to have him back. Phew, that was actually a pretty long one in the making, despite being a relatively short game. But anyways, I didn't come here to complain. Next time, we're taking a look at the sequel to Rayman 1, which propelled the series into 3D and is widely considered one of the best 3D platformers of all time. I know I said in the Sonic Adventure video that I usually avoid playing another game in the same series right afterwards, but in the case of some sequels, like for example the transition from Rayman 1 to Rayman 2, I feel that there's a big enough change in gameplay that I don't get fatigued. Though, my ability to cover the game does at this point depend on whether I'll actually receive the game and the console in time to complete the video in a timely manner, so there might just be one or two videos in between. Anyways, you'll find out in a couple of weeks, so see you then.